We are at the Evansville Wartime Museum today with Nancy Jane Spradley. Nancy, if you would, please give us your full name, your date of birth, and where you were born.
I'm Nancy Jane Spradley. I was born July 23rd, 1929, in New Harmony, Indiana, in a little house next to the doctor. So Mother just called him over, and they always laughed.
Well, you have a number of stories and remembrances from this area in southern Indiana and New Harmony during World War II, and we would love for you to tell us about your experiences during that time.
I would love to tell you because I appreciate so much what you're doing with this museum so that my great-grandchildren can know what happened. It's the stories. I'm 93, so I made some cheat notes for myself. When war was declared, the next day was a Monday, the superintendent of the high school called all the grades from the 7th grade through the 12th to the assembly, and he played the speech that President Roosevelt gave. And after it was over, in that room full of teenagers and pre-teenagers, there was absolute silence. Then he had us stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance and gave just a brief talk on supporting the troops and supporting our country, and they dismissed us all to go to our classes. The 8th grade went to music class and tore out the national anthem of Japan. And the music teacher stopped them and she said, "Don't destroy the music." And that has always stuck in my head. We'll have the music. We can't control the people, but we'll have, oh, okay. And the town was already ready for war. There had been that song where the storm clouds had gathered, and so a lot of the organizations were doing things. There were soldiers already in the United States, some from around here. They would send them soap and cigarettes, and in the grocery store and the drugstore, they would have cans, and you put your change in it. Then they would take that, the organization that was backing that would take that money and use it to do something to support the troops or something, some need to be filled. A lot of soldiers were hitchhiking at that time there. That was a way to get around. And New Harmony is across the Wabash from Illinois, and there was a toll bridge. So the toll takers would have the soldiers who were hitchhiking come in and sit and have coffee or a Coke. That whoever came to pay their toll, they would ask them where they were going. And if it was any place near where the soldiers wanted to go, he would ask them to take the soldiers. And they almost always did, and often would go out of their way to take the soldiers where they wanted to go. The churches sort of had organized women things. They had knitting clubs, and they knit scarves and gloves, and they were sent to camps for the soldiers to have and then to take with them. Everybody had a victory garden. You made it known if you wanted to have one, then either someone with a plow or a farmer that lived on the edge of town would come and plow up usually your backyard, but any yard. And they really, really used them. Mother and I grew tomatoes and lettuce and all the usual things, and you shared them with your neighbors if they didn't have a garden or something of theirs wasn't. And if you had left over, you took them downtown to one of the gas stations, and they had a table out that people could come. Sugar was rationed, shoes were rationed, gas was rationed, and you got your gas card from how far you had to go to work. Okay, now,
Can I ask you a question on
Of
the
course.
rationing?
yes,
So they would carpool like from the community surrounding the area. So as far as gas went, if more than one person owned a car, do you know if they took that into consideration? Like,
no, I don't know, but people were pretty honorable then. My mother had a C card because she taught school in another town, and then when she was driving back and forth to the shipyards, the C card worked but you never saw a car with just one person in it.
Right.
There were always several people. And I don't know what the B card was. The A card was if you didn't really drive very much. It was just so you could do a little bit of driving.
The B card, according to our display in the museum, meant you could get 8 gallons of gasoline a week.
Okay. So, okay.
So
Well,
C, you could get more than, I guess, right? Yeah.
yeah, I knew Mother had a C card, and that was it. And the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts really, really helped. The Boy Scouts would do things like clean sidewalks, or if there was the father of the family or the older son of the family was not there, they would run errands. They were prepared. They really, really were. And I was a Girl Scout, but the Girl Scout organization had a small group called Senior Service Scouts, and you sort of took a vow or that you would work more toward the war, and there were 8 of us that joined that. We had a nickel line. It's tape that you put down, and we would put it at one corner and run it the whole length of the block. And we'd kind of watch in between. My granddad had the drugstore in the middle of the block, so usually we would wait there because he'd give us a Coke or something while we were watching. Then when the tape was full, somebody'd gather it up and we'd put it down again. And we did it on a Saturday because that's when everybody in a little town came to town. And then we would give that money to a church or whoever was gathering money for some particular thing for the war.
So what is it, so it was a tape that had little slots to put nickels in? and you
No,
would
it was
stretch
just regular tape.
Just
like
regular Scotch tape type of deal? Sticky tape?
it was either Scotch tape, it was sticky tape.
Sticky tape, okay.
It was.
And you'd stretch right across there and then people would take their nickel
You
and
would
stick
just-
it to it. Okay.
You would just stick it down. You'd have to lean over to stick it on.
Oh, okay,
But
okay.
and that came from when we collected money for polio. The president had polio, and so that we were aware of that. So that's where that idea came from.
Oh, okay.
So since we Senior Service Scouts had pledged to do all we could, that was one of the first things we thought of.
Very cool.
That working with for the Red Cross, they wanted people to bring sandwiches and cookies and candy. So somebody in the town would volunteer for that day, and they would assign us. I think we probably went maybe 3 different days in a month, and we'd put about 5 of us in one car because of we would come over to the train station, and you would just stand outside, and the soldiers would come and have a homemade sandwich and cookies, and they seemed to enjoy it. I wrote and later married a young man named Gus, and he was on a troop train going from, he was going to Philadelphia, and they stopped in West Virginia. And the Red Cross was there with those things, and the guy sitting next to him said, well, they do that in Evansville, Indiana. And he didn't know that Gus was from Evansville, but I'm sure the Red Cross did that all over the United States. But,
They did, but there were a couple that were really famous for how often and how much they did that. And Evansville was one of the more famous canteens.
well, they certainly organized it beautifully, and the people in New Harmony were so generous with making sandwiches and cookies, and just it was, and they always seemed to be so happy to have something that wasn't made in a mess hall. I guess.
Oh, I'm sure, and when you think of the fact that food was rationed at the time, that was a sacrifice for people.
Thank you for saying that, because you're right. Sugar was rationed, and people were baking cookies and that sort of thing, and giving their. But the whole, now it's a little town, New Harmony, well, you were just there, but New Harmony is small, and you really did know everybody. Not well, not everybody, but they really, really did work together. Shall I go on?
Sure.
Okay. We sold poppies for disabled vets. They had started that in World War I think, but we did that. There were really talented people in New Harmony, and we got this idea, let's have a show. And we enlisted, and anybody that wanted to be in it was in it. And it was a sellout. And we gave our money to the troops, whatever was needed at that time. Like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, let's have a show, and we did. There had been a tradition in New Harmony that there was a Christmas dance, and of course they didn't have one in '41. And the Tri-Kappas, which is a social service organization in Indiana, thought they shouldn't do it. And so our group said, we'll help. We'll do the decorations, and we'll help. Let's do. So they did. In '42, they had the annual Christmas dance, and soldiers that were home were so glad.
Sure.
And they kept it up. They did it every year.
Cool. Yeah. A sense of normalcy.
A sense of normalcy. This is what we're doing. They collected metal. So we would take little wagons and go over town and pick up metal out of the yards. And the joke got to be, don't leave your tools out, because if they're laying out there, they're going to pick them up. And we would take them to the gas stations. And then they I don't know what they did with them, but something. We all wrote letters to of course, the men we knew from New Harmony. But if someone knew a soldier, or would say, would you write to him? The school took a busload, and it would have had to be in the fall, several years, to collect milkweed pods, because they used the milkweed pods in jackets, flight jackets. Yeah. And those things were hard. That everybody say, oh good, we're going to be out of school. Well, you were, but that was...
You were working.
You were working. And to prove that I've told you the truth, when I was going to do this, I thought, well, I remember everything, and then I remembered that the 50-year anniversary for World War II, the Posey County paper interviewed us, who had been senior service scouts, and I don't know whether you can get this or not. Anyway, this is a picture of when we all were. And if you can't, it's okay.
Yeah, I've got it.
You can take my word for it. There were 8 of us that were senior service scouts.
And which one is you?
I'm this one.
All right.
The one sitting on the fender.
Very nice.
Okay, then 50 years later, here we are.
Oh, cool.
Now we're only 6 now, because 2 have gone. They've left us.
That's nice to have that, yeah. Cool.
And in it, as they ask us, everything I told you, I can verify from this letter, because I had forgotten about the Christmas dance, and it was in here. There are 6 of us here. 30 years later, there are 2 of us. So, And something else I'd like to share. I graduated in 1947, and this is my commencement. But I want to read to you, well, they added 5 young men who had left school and didn't get their diplomas, so they added their names to ours, so they are always included in the class of 47, and I hope other high schools did that. Do you know if they did?
I think a lot of them did that kind of thing, yes.
It was such.
I remember my mother saying
Good.
things like
Well,
that.
I felt surely they did, but I never had talked to anyone to verify.
Right.
But well, now the pictures, Marcia. I'm glad you brought it up.
I just know you brought some.
They were talking about the ships and how uncomfortable they were, and these are pictures of soldiers that they were on a ship. Now this bunch were going from Europe to Asia when the war was over in Europe. It says on the transport from Marseille, so they must have sailed from Marseille.
And he was in a combat engineer unit, and he was going from France over to the Philippines, right? For an assignment over there.
Yeah.
Okay, and these are just, they're a couple, well, they're just little pictures. But I just want, can you see thickness?
Yep.
These are the kind of letters that a 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girl sends to a soldier who's in basic training and working and I just so appreciate Mike and Gus telling me it's okay. And these are my letters from Gus. This is the first one from Fort Benjamin Harrison. And I suspect you know about this, Mike, but when they left Benjamin Harrison, they left him with rules, with "You are a soldier."
Oh.
You are a soldier. Soldiers are gentlemen. Soldiers are subject to the articles of war. The setting corporal is in charge of your group. The setting corporal is to be obeyed and respected. Any property destroyed by you will be taken from your pay. But they got to come home. But then they told them how a soldier should
Act like a soldier when you're not here. Yeah.
And Gus did his basic training in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. This is just a picture of the.
That's the Corps of Engineers symbol.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
and this is another. Now, then he was sent to Philadelphia. They gave them some tests, I guess, at Fort Belvoir to decide where to put them. And Gus had wanted to be a petroleum engineer, so they sent. He went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and that's where they then got together. He was in Corps 1524 of the engineers construction group. When I said to you, there's something I wanted to say about young men, and you would see the young men asleep. Is it okay to just?
Sure.
Oh, okay. This one made me cry, but it looked. Haven't had any mail for 3. I've got the wrong letter. No, I haven't. For a month. When in France, got a glimpse of the old cathedral at Reims. And then he says he hasn't had any mail in a month. It seemed like years. Had a birthday. My 20th birthday. And I remember when I got this letter, I thought about him, 20 years old, in a foreign country, in war. And then bigger than that was all the other young men that were 20 years old
Exactly.
and in a war. Okay,
And that made them the greatest generation.
absolutely. Absolutely. This one, it's something else I want to tell you all about him. In all his letters, he never had anything from the examiner. There was never anything blacked out of his letters. He didn't tell us anything.
He followed the rules.
He followed the rules. This says Germany. I ought to put my glasses on if you
Sure.
don't mind. I should have thought of it. I'm sorry.
Not a problem.
We can tell where we are now, just outside of Mannheim, near the Rhine River. Have seen practically all of the country in this region, and it is really beautiful. Most of the towns are practically demolished, but the country is surely pretty. And then he goes on with some other things. But there's a whole letter here from him to his folks I'd like to read,
Sure.
because they are his reaction to what has happened. Howdy. We can tell where we're located now. It's just outside of Mannheim near the Rhine River. Have seen most of the country in this part of Germany. It is beautiful, and the Autobahn is a wonderful highway. Some of the towns are still in good shape, but most of them are practically demolished. In Stuttgart, which is a good-sized city, there are areas that are completely flat. Every inch of their soul is cultivated in nicely laid out patterns and is very picturesque. In the forests, you see you see nothing lying around, and there is practically no underbrush. It is really a beautiful country, and the people are very industrious. This is a lot more than you see in France. Germany is so far ahead of France. The German people seem to really have a lot of respect for the Americans, more so than the other allies. There is no doubt but what they hate us and will do us harm when they feel they can. But nevertheless, they do have a great respect for us, which they cannot hide. I have been out on reconnaissance many times and have had contacts with the Germans, asking information and etc. They try to be very helpful. And when asking directions of towns and roads, I have expected them to lead us on a wild goose chase. But they have never done that in any way or given any false information. Many times I have worn just a plain uniform without chevrons or any identification that I was an American soldier. I don't know why, but they always take me for a French soldier. Generally, in the middle of the conversation, they will ask or say that I'm a French soldier, and when I tell them I'm an American, they darn near break their necks trying to help. It is surprising how many Germans can speak some English. I have no use for any of these Germans, but they are really way ahead of the French. And he goes on. But
Interesting.
No. Okay, then the next letter says he's going to be gone. He has to go to Japan, and he asked me if the people at home have any idea how long they think it's going to take to win the war.
Right.
That the people there say 5 or 6 months. He thinks it would be, Gus's opinion is it's 18 months. None of us knew about that atomic bomb that
Right.
we were saying a while ago. And he was in the Philippines for quite a while, evidently, you knew what you said was, I'm pointing to mine. They took so many points to be able to come home.
Yeah,
So somehow he hadn't accumulated enough points.
yeah, they gave you more points if you were in actual combat too, on front lines and everything. If you've been wounded, you got points for that.
Okay,
And
well,
so it was a combination of those
he had
things.
built bridges, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
If he was lucky
how
and
that-
didn't get wounded,
Yeah,
that's always a good thing.
I don't know how
Yeah.
how that counted, but and he said I'll send the cable. Well, I got a cable at one point, and I was so excited. They didn't let him come home then. They stopped him. But John has the cable, I think, in your poster that he sent where he really was coming home.
Cool.
I just want to tell you all, thank you for doing what you're doing. And for my grandchildren and other people's, you're doing a wonderful thing.
It's always good to hear that, being, volunteers and everything, if we know, to educate and everything, and people appreciate it, that's always,
Well,
always helps us.
I was watching it all happen, and I know how, thank you.
Well, and we want to thank you for taking the time to tell us about the things that were happening in your life at the time of the war. And it's these kinds of things and your stories that help bring this into perspective for people and bring it alive for them. So we want to thank you for your time today. And is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we end here today?
Just thank you.
All right. Well,
I had one question.
Okay.
Can you tell us, do you have any kind of, mental snapshot of when you were handing out food and everything in the train stations, of anything that you really remember, a particular soldier, a group or anything that
I remember,
stands out in your mind?
I don't remember a particular soldier, but I remember how eager they would be, and there'd be several lined up. Now there'd be 3 or 4, or sometimes 5 of.
And they were very polite too, right?
Oh, very polite, and so grateful. It was such a good idea. Whoever thought of that, because they may have just eaten stuff, but these were homemade sandwiches
Okay.
and homemade cookies, and
Yeah, that's neat. That's neat.
but no, there was.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Spradley.
You're very welcome.